The Mongol Empire, under Genghis Khan, transformed nomadic tribes of Central Asia into the largest contiguous land empire in history in just over 1 century. It stretched from Siberia to Hungary and redefined global warfare and trade. Like, subscribe and share. Let's begin. The prelude to this era of dominance lies in the isolation and brutality of life on the steppes in the late 12th century. Before unification, the Mongol people were not a single political entity, but a myriad of clans and tribes: Mongols, Tatars, Karaites, Naimans, constantly at war for control of pastures, horses and power. These tribes shared a nomadic, essentially pastoral lifestyle, depending on their flocks of sheep, goats and above all horses. The Mongolian horse, small, robust and resilient, was the center of their existence, serving as transport, food through fermented mare's milk, the kumis, and crucially, the war platform. The social structure was fluid and highly meritocratic within clans, but brutally competitive between them. Their lives were defined by nomadism, self-sufficiency, and a strict code of honor, where betrayal and revenge were as common as freezing winters. The law of the steppe was simple: might made right. Prolonged winters and periodic droughts often exacerbated tensions, pushing clans into violent raids to steal cattle and secure resources. It was in this environment of intense competition and struggle for survival that Temujin was born. Around 1162, Temujin's childhood was a test of survival. After the poisoning of his father, Yesugei, leader of the Borjigin clan, the young Temujin, his mother Holan and his brothers were abandoned by their own clan, forced to live as outcasts, hunting rodents and fish to survive. This experience of deprivation and betrayal instilled in him an implacable toughness and a deep understanding of the fragility of tribal loyalties. The abandonment and humiliations he suffered, including his own capture and temporary enslavement by the Taichiud clan, forged a personality marked by the need for unwavering unity and absolute loyalty. Temujin's mother Holan played a crucial role, instilling in her sons the resilience needed to survive. Temujin's rise to power was not a stroke of luck, but a laborious and calculated process of creating alliances, demonstrations of loyalty, and acts of force. One of his first and most important allies was Togrul Khan of the Karaites, an old friend of his father, and his childhood friend Jamuka. Although Jamuka and Temujin would become mortal rivals, their initial alliances allowed Temujin to build a military power base. Through a series of strategic campaigns and astute diplomacy, Temujin began to absorb or destroy rival tribes. The key to his genius lay not only in battle, but in his ability to transcend blood loyalties and create a new military identity based on merit. Unlike previous tribal structures where plunder and position were distributed by kinship, Temujin promoted his generals based on their skill and loyalty, noko. This radical meritocracy was key to the cohesion of his army. By integrating defeated warriors into his own ranks with their children and families under his protection, he ensured that the defeated enemies had a personal interest in his success. The defeated Mongols became loyal Mongols. The culminating moment of their unification came in 1206, in a large assembly or kurultai of tribal leaders on the banks of the Onon River. Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title that means universal ruler. The Mongol Empire, or Yeke Mongol Ulus, the great Mongolian nation, had been born. The proclamation was not just a change of title. It was the turning point where tribal disputes were replaced by a unified and centralized state with a transcendent purpose: to rule the world. With the steppe consolidated, the newly anointed Genghis Khan turned his gaze towards the richer, more settled world surrounding his homeland. The main objective of the early campaigns was not simply territorial conquest, but economic necessity: to secure trade routes, obtain luxury goods, and, crucially, to keep unified an army whose main purpose was war and the acquisition of plunder. Mongol nomadism had reached a limit, and only expansion could sustain the newly achieved unity. The military mastery of the Mongols, the secret of their success, was based on several factors that combined created a fighting force that was virtually invincible in its time. First, light cavalry and logistics were unmatched in mobility and speed. Mongol warriors were expert horsemen from childhood. They could ride for days with minimal stops, using several reserve horses per warrior, ensuring they always had fresh mounts. They survived on fermented mare's milk, kumis, and dried meat, biltong. Their main weapon was the Mongolian composite bow, a marvel of military technology. Powerful even at a gallop, this bow allowed the Mongols to fire arrows with devastating accuracy at greater distances than most of their opponents, employing shoot-and-run tactics that decimated sedentary heavy armies. Secondly, their discipline and organization were impeccable. Genghis Khan instituted the decimal system to organize his army. 10 men formed an arban, 10 Arbans a Jagun, 100, 10 Jaguns a Mingun, 1,000, and 10 Minguns a Tumen, 10,000. This decimal structure ensured a clear chain of command and allowed for smooth coordination of large masses of troops, even across vast distances, facilitating complex maneuvers such as double envelopment and feigned retreats. Disobedience and desertion were punished with death for the entire unit, which guaranteed iron discipline. Third, espionage and planning were crucial. Before each campaign, the Mongol explorers, Jaral, gathered detailed information about the terrain, weather, trade routes, and enemy forces, allowing them to strike where the enemy was weakest or least prepared. Deception and psychological warfare were essential tools. Finally, their adaptability allowed them to overcome weaknesses. Initially, the Mongols were not experts in siege warfare, a requirement for conquering fortified cities. However, they learned quickly. By capturing Chinese and Persian engineers and experts, they soon mastered the use of catapults, trebuchets, and siege engines, turning the captive workforce into an essential component of their conquest machinery. The first sedentary power to feel the weight of the new war machine was the Jin dynasty, which controlled northern China. Before attacking the Jin, Genghis Khan secured his western flank by defeating the western Shixia dynasty, which served as a buffer between the Mongols and the Jin. The conquest of Xixia provided valuable insights into siege warfare and, crucially, allowed the Mongols to strategically encircle the Jin. The campaigns against the Jin, which began around 1211, were the trial by fire for the Mongol army. The Mongols faced for the first time large-scale siege warfare and the fortified defenses of Chinese cities. Despite the Jin having massive armies and the Great Wall as a defense, Mongol mobility allowed them to circumvent the static defenses. Although initially overwhelmed by the challenges of siege warfare, Mongol ingenuity and adaptability, often using captured Chinese prisoners and experts to build and operate siege machinery, enabled them to overcome the barriers. The capture and plunder of Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing, in 1215 was a brutal act that sent shockwaves across Asia, signaling that a terrifying new power had emerged. Although the Jin dynasty was not completely destroyed until 1234 under Genghis Khan, its power was broken, and Genghis Khan secured a vast booty and a base of operations. The westward expansion was triggered, ironically, by an act of treason. Genghis Khan sought to establish stable trade relations with the Khwarezm Empire, a Muslim power that controlled vast stretches of Persia and Central Asia. In 1218, he sent a caravan of several hundred merchants and a diplomatic delegation to Otrar. The governor of Otrar, Inalku, accused the Mongols of espionage, confiscated their property, and executed the delegation. When Genghis Khan demanded reparations and the surrender of Inalchu, Shah Muhammad II of Khwarezm not only refused, but also executed the remaining Mongol ambassador. This act, seen as a direct affront and a violation of the established laws of commerce and hospitality, Yasa, unleashed the wrath of Genghis. Between 1219 and 1221, Genghis Khan and his generals led a devastating campaign across Central Asia. Flourishing cities such as Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench were besieged, captured, and in many cases reduced to rubble. The brutality of the campaign was not gratuitous. It was a calculated tactic to instill terror and ensure the immediate surrender of future cities. It is estimated that millions of people died and that the irrigation systems, the lifeblood of the region, were destroyed for generations. The campaign was notable not only for its brutality but also for its use of innovative tactics. Genghis Khan divided his army into several columns, surrounding and annihilating the enemy and the civilian population. Subutai and Jebe's cavalry, in a long-range raid, pursued Shah Muhammad II across Persia to an island in the Caspian Sea, one of the greatest feats of cavalry in history. This campaign demonstrated that no power, however rich or well-defended, was safe. Genghis Khan died in 1227 as he was finishing the destruction of the Western Shia dynasty, leaving behind an empire that stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea. His burial was shrouded in secrecy, a practice intended to protect his eternal rest and maintain the mystical aura of his power. His legacy, however, transcended military conquest. He established a code of oral and written laws. The Yasa, the law which regulated civil and military life, promoting unity and obedience within the empire. The Yasa was not a detailed penal code like Roman law, but rather a collection of decrees and general rules that emphasized loyalty, discipline, and justice. It prohibited theft and lying, mandated religious tolerance provided taxes were paid, and established clear rules for warfare and the distribution of plunder. The Yasa was the legal and moral cement that held the vast but culturally diverse empire together after his death. Upon his death, the empire was divided among his 4 sons and their descendants, following Mongol tradition in the form of ulus, kingdoms or dominions, but with the stipulation that the Grand Khan would rule over them all from the original capital, Karakorum. Genghis Khan's first successor was his 3rd son, Ogedei Khan, who was elected in a Kurultai in 1229. Ogedei Khan presided over the golden age of the United Empire. He was not only a capable military leader, but also a shrewd administrator. Under his reign, the capital, Karakorum, was built and fortified, and a postal system was established, the Yam, with relay stations throughout the empire, and a civil administration based on Chinese and Persian models was consolidated. Under Ogedei, the expansion continued at an accelerated pace. In 1234, the Mongols finally destroyed the Jin dynasty, completing their conquest of northern China. But the most famous undertaking of this period was the invasion of Europe. Led by Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, and the brilliant general Subutai, the Mongol force launched itself westward from 1237. The rich and fragmented Russian principalities, lacking political and military unity, fell one after another. Cities like Ryazan, Kolomna, and Moscow were devastated. The Mongolian cavalry advancing across the frozen rivers in winter, a time when sedentary defenses were paralyzed, as armies were expected to attack in spring or summer, achieved a decisive strategic advantage. The use of winter as a time for attack was a logistical and psychological shock for the Russians. The resistance of some cities, such as Kozelsk, was heroic but futile in the face of Mongol determination. Having subdued Russia, the Mongols split up to invade Central Europe in a coordinated assault. A Mongol army under Khadan destroyed a combined force of Poles, Germans, and Teutonic Knights at the Battle of Legnica, 1241. Duke Henry II, the Pious of Silesia, died in the field. Almost simultaneously, at the Battle of Mohi, 1241. The main army, led by Batu and Subutai, crushed the Hungarian army of King Bela IV. The Mongols used a feint retreat and a massive flanking maneuver to annihilate the Hungarians. Europe was in a panic. It was feared that the scourge of God would continue into the Atlantic. However, amid the euphoria of victory, news of Ogedei Khan's death reached Batu in 1241, following Mongolian law. All princes of the blood were required to return to the steppe to participate in the Kurultai to choose the next great Khan. This withdrawal, although purely accidental from a European perspective, saved the Western continent from total conquest. Batu Khan, however, settled in the steppes of the Volga River, founding the Ulus kingdom, known as the Golden Horde, which would exercise ruthless sovereignty over Russia for more than 2 centuries. Like, subscribe, and share. The period between 1241 and 1259 witnessed intense consolidation and the last great waves of expansion under Ogedei's successors. Guyuk, whose reign was brief, and later Möngke Khan, Genghis's grandson, who was elected in 1251. Möngke, a strong leader, sought to restore the central power of the great Khan over the Ulus and embarked on 2 massive, simultaneous campaigns to complete Mongol rule. The first campaign, under the command of Kublai Khan, another grandson of Genghis, focused on the conquest of the powerful Song dynasty in southern China. This would be a long and difficult struggle, as the Song were experts in naval warfare and the fortifications of the south. The second, and perhaps more dramatic, was the campaign in the Middle East led by Hulagu Khan, Kublai's brother. Hulagu's mandate was to destroy the stronghold of the Assassins, Nizari, in Iran, and subdue the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. In 1258, Hulagu led his army through Persia and captured Baghdad, the heart of the Islamic world and the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate. The city was sacked and Caliph al-Mustasim was executed. This event marked a cultural and historical turning point for Islam. The Library of Baghdad, with its priceless manuscripts, was destroyed, and the massacre is estimated to have cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Hulagu's campaign continued into Syria, but his advance was halted in 1260 at the Battle of Ain Jalut by the Mamluk army of Egypt. This battle was the first decisive defeat of the Mongols in open battle and established the Euphrates River as the western limit of the Mongol advance. However, as the empire grew, so did the internal tension between the various Ulus, the Khanates. Distance, cultural differences, especially the influence of Islam on the Ilkhanate and the Golden Horde, and disputes over succession and wealth distribution led to fragmentation. The death of Mongol Khan in 1259 sparked a civil war between his brothers, Kublai Khan and Arik Bokhain, for the title of Great Khan. Although Kublai Khan ultimately prevailed, this Toluid civil war marked the end of the unified Mongol Empire. The vast domain fractured into 4 main khanates, each acting semi-independently, although nominally under the sovereignty of the Great Khan in China. The legacy of Genghis Khan manifested itself in 4 major regional powers, each adapting to its cultural and geographical environment. The Yuan dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan, moved the capital from Karakoram to Khanbalik, Beijing. Kublai completed the conquest of the Song dynasty in 1279, establishing a Mongol dynasty over all of China. Despite being considered the Great Khan, his focus was on governing China, adopting many of the Chinese administrative structures. The Yuan dynasty lasted until 1368, when it was overthrown by the Ming dynasty. The Ilkhanate, founded by Hulagu Khan, encompassed Persia, Mesopotamia, and parts of Anatolia. This Khanate became Persianized and over time converted to Islam, beginning with the Ilkhan Ghazan at the end of the 13th century. It maintained a strong influence over Persia and the Levant, becoming a center of great Persian-Mongol cultural and scientific flourishing. The Chagatai Khanate controlled the heart of ancient Central Asia, the original homeland of the Mongols. This region became a center of constant instability and Mongol conflict, often resisting centralization by both the Yuan and the Ilkhanate. It was the power base of Timur, Tamerlane, a century later. Finally, the Golden Horde, founded by Batu Khan, maintained control over the Russian principalities and the Pontic steppes from its capital at Sarai. On the Volga River, the Russian princes were forced to pay tribute and obtain a Yarlik, patent, of the Khan to govern. This rule, known as the Tatar yoke, lasted until 1480 and had a profound impact on the centralization of Russian power, especially in Moscow. Despite its political fragmentation, Mongolian unification had a transformative impact on the world. This period, often known as the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongolian Peace Treaty, facilitated an unprecedented level of communication and trade along the Silk Road. By eliminating customs barriers, protecting caravans from bandits, and establishing a common law throughout the region, the Yasa, the Mongols created the first truly integrated transcontinental trading system. The Mongols, though ruthless in their conquests, were remarkably tolerant of religions and cultures, provided taxes were paid and loyalty was maintained to the Khan. This tolerance allowed travelers like Marco Polo and monks like William of Rubruck to travel safely across their vast empire, facilitating the exchange of ideas, technologies, and goods. The flow of knowledge was mainly from east to west, with Chinese gunpowder, printing, paper money, advanced medical knowledge, cartographic techniques, and the compass reaching Europe. This exchange was crucial, as contact with Asian technologies accelerated the development of Europe, laying the foundations for the Renaissance. Unfortunately, the Pax Mongolica also facilitated the transfer of the plague. The Black Death, which originated in Asia, spread devastatingly across Eurasia in the mid-14th century. The fast and safe Mongolian trade routes became fast tracks for disease, decimating the population of China, the Islamic world, and Europe, with profound social and economic consequences. The final legacy of the Mongol Empire is complex and contradictory. On one hand, it was responsible for massive destruction and an incalculable loss of life. Cities and irrigation systems were destroyed, and the demographic and political map of Asia was rewritten in blood. The reputation of Genghis Khan and his successors was built on calculated terror that altered the way nations interacted. On the other hand, Mongolian unification was a catalyst for early modernity. By connecting the West and the East, they accelerated the spread of information and technology, indirectly paving the way for the European Renaissance and the Age of Exploration. In Russia, the yoke of the Golden Horde forced the unification and centralization of power around Moscow, which emerged as the dominant power in the 15th century by adopting many of the Mongol military and fiscal techniques, leading to the birth of the modern Russian state. In China, the Yuan dynasty set a precedent for foreign rule over all of China, and its centralized administration, although criticized, influenced later dynasties. In the Middle East, the Ilkhanate transformed the region's politics. Although the fall of Baghdad was a catastrophe, the Ilkhanate became a center of cultural synthesis, where Persian astronomers and Mongol administrators shaped new scientific and institutional developments. The figure of Genghis Khan remains the archetype of the nomadic conqueror, a leader who, with an implacable vision and a well-oiled military machine, achieved what no force had achieved before, uniting a vast and diverse world under a single banner. The greatest land empire ever seen was ultimately a phenomenon of military and political organization that demonstrated the power of unity and strategic genius on the largest scale in human history. To fully understand the military success of the empire, it is vital to examine the culture that underpinned it. Mongolian society was based on the concept of ulus, not only as a territorial subdivision, but as the inheritance of people, livestock, and land. The individual existed for the clan and the clan for the Khan. Unlike in the sedentary societies of the time, Mongolian women enjoyed a considerably higher status. Women of the nobility, such as Holan, Genghis's mother, and Torogene Khatun, Ogode's wife, could influence politics, administer large territories, and even rule as regents during interregnums. Torogene, for example, ruled the empire for 5 years after Ogode's death, demonstrating the capacity for female leadership in the steppe culture. Women were essential to the administration of yurt and for pastoral tasks, and their resilience was highly valued. The original religion of the Mongols was shamanism, centered on the worship of the eternal sky, Tengri. However, the Yasa guaranteed religious freedom. This tolerance was not altruism, but pragmatism. By protecting Buddhists, Nestorian Christians, Muslims, and Taoists, Genghis Khan ensured that the experts and skilled labor from these communities could work for the empire without fear of persecution, centralizing their loyalty to the Khan rather than to their local rulers. Möngke Khan, for example, held religious debates in Karakoram, listening to representatives of all the major religions. The yam, the auto, was one of the most important administrative innovations. It was a system of relay stations and checkpoints, the jam, that extended throughout the entire empire. The yam allowed messengers to travel up to 250 kilometers per day, carrying vital military and administrative information to the capital and back to the far reaches of the empire. For authorized travelers, the paisa, a metal identity plate often made of gold or silver, guaranteed food, shelter, and fresh horses in every season, making possible the rapid communication that the vast scale of the empire demanded. Although the united Mongol Empire ended with the Toluid Civil War in 1260, the Khanates continued to wield formidable power. However, they all eventually declined for similar reasons: cultural assimilation and internal struggle. The Mongols in China became more sedentary and assimilated into Chinese culture, which diluted their military identity. A series of natural disasters, poor administrations, and peasant uprisings, such as the Red Turban Rebellion, led to the expulsion of the Mongols from China in 1368. The Ilkhanate, with its adoption of Islam and Persian culture, fragmented its original Mongol identity in the 14th century. The Golden Horde maintained its nomadic structure for longer, but was weakened by internal struggles and the growing strength of Moscow. It fragmented into the Khanates of Kazan, Astrakhan, and Crimea, the latter being the longest lasting. Mongolian history had a dramatic resurgence with the figure of Timur Tamerlane at the end of the 14th century. Timur, a Turkic Mongol from the Chagatai region, considered himself the heir of Genghis Khan. Although not a direct descendant, he used the legitimacy of Genghis's lineage to build a vast empire in Central Asia, Persia, and India. Tamerlane's conquest repeated the brutality and military audacity of his predecessors, demonstrating that the Mongol strategic genius still endured on the steppe. His legacy, the Timurid Empire, became a great center of Islamic art and learning. The greatest land empire ever seen was ultimately a phenomenon of military and political organization that demonstrated the power of unity and strategic genius on the largest scale in human history. The figure of Genghis Khan, the leader who transformed a band of tribes into the largest empire the world has ever known, remains a testament to the power of visionary leadership and ruthless discipline, whose echo resonates to this day in the geopolitics of Eurasia. The impact of the Mongol Empire transcends political history. Modern genetic studies have suggested that a surprisingly high number of men living today in the area of the former Mongol Empire, estimated at around 0.5% of the world's male population, share the same Y chromosome, which could be traced back to Genghis Khan or a close relative. While the studies are debatable regarding the exact identity of the ancestor, they illustrate the demographic scale of the empire's influence. In a broader geopolitical sense, the Mongol legacy was the unwitting precursor to globalization. By connecting East and West, they created a unique Eurasian island world in terms of trade, migration, and, crucially, pathogens. The Pax Mongolica not only transported silk and spices, but also ideas and the engine of disease, demonstrating the inevitable interconnectedness of the world. The Mongol Empire was, In its essence, a force for radical change. It destroyed borders, toppled old civilizations, and in doing so forced surviving societies to adapt, centralize, and ultimately modernize, paving the way for the modern era. Like, subscribe, and share. See you next time.